All right, welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is The Press coming to you live from the Abuja studios of KAFTAN Television. And now we've been joined by our very own Dr. Mefor. And together we shall be taking a look at the headlines we just read out to you earlier. And this is also a reminder that our phone lines are open for you to call and join the conversation. Good morning, Dr. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you.
It's always amazing to have you, and Fridays are one of my best days on The Press because I get to have these interesting conversations with you.
Thank you for your kind words.
All right, now let's get into the business of the day. One of the most recurring headlines on most of our national dailies this morning is of the ordeals of the returnees and all of the stories around it. I'll just take this one from the Nigerian Tribune this morning. Our ordeal returnees from Sudan recounts 4 air flights or aircraft conveying about 400 students or returnees are expected today. Our federal government mobilizes Nigerian Airlines, Sudanese local airline. No Nigeria who wishes to come home will be left behind. And also the federal government has given the returnees 100,000 naira each. They also recounted their story how they were left stranded for about 8 days. So what are your thoughts on everything, like from the federal government's swiftness to response, the 100,000 naira, will it do justice? And what about evaluation, mental assessment? Nobody is talking about that.
Yes, certainly you implicated mental status examination as a need that must come into the mix before fully discharging the returnees because of their traumatic experience. You know, trauma is a very fundamental problem, and in psychology we look at trauma as a near-death experience. That is simply what they went through, because they were in the eye of the storm. They saw war, they saw death, they survived. So the experience is there. It's something that requires a debriefing for them to see that if they have come this far, yes, they can take it further. They don't need to really continue to relive that experience because it is nightmarish. It really deals a lot of blows on the human psyche and our well-being generally. Then coming to Nigeria's response on the whole, our usual tardiness. First, we noticed there was this, should I say, crisis of confidence, you know, between the office of the diaspora, commission headed by Abike and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And if you look at it, the Diaspora Commission is wrongly placed in the presidency. It ought to operate under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that's what has resulted in this conflict between the two. And you can understand why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not quite keen on taking the lead, when the Diaspora Commission jumped into the fray and started throwing its weight around and calling out that indeed this is its statutory responsibility. When 2 elephants fight, it is the grass that normally suffer. So we saw that play out here, but somehow it was resolved, and the commission was able to belatedly intervene, and their intervention also was not really properly coordinated. As we speak now, only about 500 out of over 3,000 are in Nigeria. And I am also aware that not all of the Nigerians stranded in Sudan have been moved to the airstrip in Egypt. And because I saw a number of disturbing videos of people who complained that they were even asked to come down from the evacuating buses. And those who were asked to come down from those buses, nobody has told us clearly, their fate, because in a well-coordinated operation such as this, asking Nigerians, people who could be verified to be Nigerians, to come down from buses because you have what you consider priorities, I don't think it is really right. And even if you have priorities, there should be a better way of getting people to understand. For example, the Diaspora Commission may be more interested in dealing with vulnerability as a factor. In other words, women, children, students, you know, for them should be given more priority. You explain these things even to those people, for them to see that, look, you know, let these weaker ones move and you follow. That's it. Because you are in a better position to even respond to emergency should it occur, you know, much more than a woman, a child. Do you understand that? I'm not sure that these things were presented in that manner, or if they were presented in the manner that the videos we saw, wasn't actually being mischievous. And I still think that that aspect needs to be corrected, because I saw ethnic profiling in that, and it's not good for the country. Then there is even a bigger problem of the kind of arrangement we made with Egypt as a sovereign nation. Egypt, for example, should worry about the number of Nigerians that could melt into their country and simply disappear. You know, we see Nigerians who disappear, you know, when they go to here and there on pilgrimage to Israel, to, you know, Saudi Arabia and stuff. They just disappear. You know, so if Egypt says, look, we need to have you out of our country, you know, as quickly as possible. They know what they are doing. There should have been a better arrangement so that Egypt will give you know, more concession, some breathing space for, you know, for these returnees not to receive additional trauma. We're already talking about near-death experience that they survived in Sudan, and here in Egypt, where they believed they have found succor, they are receiving a bigger blow. So I think yes, the president did something quite significant. I think he spoke with Morsi, the president of Egypt, you know, to allow that space to enable our people use their corridor, you know, to be evacuated. The reason is simple. It would have been easier, cheaper, you know, faster for APs that volunteered to aircrafts and the Nigerian Air Force, you know, planes to fly straight into Sudan. But it's a war zone. You know, Turkey that tried it, I understand one of their planes that dared to enter was shot down. So if you allow, if it's daring, you know, and you have two factions here fighting, so you don't even know who to clear with. If one faction gives you the go-ahead to come in, the other one may treat you as an enemy. You know, so it's a messy situation. For me, it's not a moment of uhuru yet. We need to do more, because like I said, as at last night, only about 500, you know, have come. You know, I'm not sure it's up to 500 yet. And
300.
Oh, good. So
almost 400.
You know, so you now see that well over 3,000 are still out there in Egypt, and the country is saying, leave our shores. And I am also worried that a good number of Nigerians may still be in Sudan, you know, like those who were asked to come down from the buses. Is there evidence that that buses went back for those who are not on the priority list? There is even one major blunder, which I don't know how they came about. They started classifying the people to be evacuated, you know, classifying and categorizing them state by state. I don't see the rationale for that kind of measure in a war situation where people are facing life and death. I can understand prioritization of women and children and students. I can understand that, but to classify Nigerians in a war zone state by state, for me, is taking the matter too far. You know, it's marks of so many things that call for explanation. You know, I think that's my impression on our response to the Sudan problem.
Okay, so let's talk about what Olaikan said, saying that all elections on the Nigerian Tribune, he said, all election petitions should be decided before inauguration of government. One would think that would be, the rationale, decision on that. But my question to you is, do you side with him on this, and how do you react to this information?
Well, for me, I read that, and a lot of people agree with him, and one or two may not agree. But I don't think the issue is even agreeing or disagreeing with him. I don't think so. I think the revered man of God, the Catholic Archbishop of Abuja, Emeritus, a cardinal. So in terms of spirituality, human conditions, appreciation, and interventions, one can see that is at the peak of it. He's even retired, to show that by age also, he is everywhere. He is apolitical, naturally. But of course, you recall that Onaikon and the Sultan of Sokoto are co-chair to the inter-religious dialogue in Nigeria. And it's a containment measure put in place by the then military administration to promote dialogue and conversation. In other words, he is not fully apolitical. Because of that commission, they are expected to make statements, when things like this are about engulfing the country. So his concern is very clear, germane, as a matter of fact. And he says it makes no sense to swear in a president-elect when the validity of the person's election is not discharged. That is a very basic fact, isn't it? Yes. And for me, it is sensible, and his statement is clear and unequivocal. And what I think is left on is to put it in perspective. That wish of his is what it ought to be. But that's not the position of the law. Because the Electoral Act provides for 180 days, for the tribunal to discharge its responsibility. That overshoots the handover date. That's the first problem. So even legally, the tribunal can, may decide not to feel any sense of urgency. And don't forget that you have the litigants and the defendants, in this case the president-elect. Somebody is benefiting from the scenario. Do you understand that? And you don't expect that person who is benefiting from the scenario not to try to really benefit from the scenario. By this I mean, if the law says that his case should be discharged in 180 days, do you understand that? His defense team, can begin to throw in things in the mix to ensure that they benefit from it. That's it. Now, the tribunal is there to sort of moderate the process and urge what you may call speedy dispensation of justice. That's the much the tribunal can really do. But there are things, there are technicalities that this defense team and even the litigants, their own teams, would naturally throw into the mix. There are motions that will come. You see, the tribunal has fixed 10, 12, and 13, I think, to begin the hearing proper. And I think something may happen on 8th, Monday, if Monday is 8th. They are starting seriously on Monday. But what they will start is even the preliminary matters. They're not even the substantive. So, by the time you deal with these preliminary matters, there will be objections. If the tribunal delivers rulings, judgments on those preliminary issues, the defense team has every right to challenge it in the Supreme Court. So in all this, if you check that today is what's today's date, is 8th or 9th?
Today is 5th.
Today is 5th, right?
Yes.
Today is 5th. We are talking about 24 days to hand over, and you have preliminary matters that can even go to the Supreme Court. Yes. And there are some of the matters that are some of the challenges, some of the issues that will be thrown into the mix that will be so fundamental that until they are discharged, you may not even be able to go into the substantive case. Okay. And in all this, I see that you really cannot. I really don't know how Nikon's expectations will be met. He's not the only one who is saying that, look, deal with this before you swear in.
Yes.
Olisa Abakoba, for example, raised it, and even the suggestions for interim national government to be brought in, all came from these assumptions, because it is really not logical. It is not right, morally and otherwise, for you to swear in a governor. We're not just talking about the president-elect. It affects all of them: the president, the governors, the senators, the House of Reps members and honorable members of the state houses of assembly. It covers all of them. So people have their sights set on the presidency, the president-elect, and it's the entire gamut. It's not right for you to have somebody occupy an office in substantive capacity, not in acting capacity. Because if the president-elect and the governor-elect would be sworn in acting capacity, it would be a different thing. When you say somebody is acting, there are decisions you can't take. That is what acting means. There are decisions you can't take. But if you swear in the president-elect as president, he is going to assume all the powers of the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That is the implication. That's what people fear, that it is not right. But is it starting with Tinubu? Obasanjo was sworn in. Yaradua was sworn in. Goodluck Jonathan was sworn in. Do you understand that? Buhari was sworn in. So, do you understand that? They were all sworn in before their cases were discharged by the tribunal. In a few instances, the tribunals were able to discharge. For example, I recall that the case of Senator Mondo Sumbo as governor, I think that's the name, governor of Edo State. The tribunal was able to finish his matter before, no, he was sworn in. He was sworn in, and the tribunal says, you are not the governor. That is the Shomole. And he left in a matter of weeks. Remember the case of Andy Uba in 2007? Do you understand? Andy Uba was also sworn in, and in 17 or 19 days, he was told he's not the governor. Peter Obi returned. So, it's not a tidy arrangement. And who do we blame for this? We blame the political class. You know why I say so? In 2007, during the presidential election of 2007, under the INEC chairmanship of Professor Maurice Iwu, Maurice Iwu, returned Yaradua with 27 million votes under most controversial and ridiculous circumstance. And it was very serious, to the point that the president-elect Yaradua, when he was sworn in, denounced the election and set up the wise committee on electoral reforms. Now, what were the recommendations of the wise committee? They recommended that election must hold minimum 6 months to hand over, so that all electoral matters will be dispensed with. Did they implement it?
No.
They did not. So who do you blame? Yaradua that set up the committee did not send any bill to that effect to National Assembly. Goodluck Jonathan, that was vice president that took over from him as acting president and as president, did not do the same. Instead, he personalized it, appropriated the presumptions of the committee by claiming that he appointed Jega he never knew. That's not what the law asks you to do. The law said make it into law. That's what the Wise Report asks you to do. They didn't do this. Now, they suffered it in 2015. They suffered it in 2019. They are suffering it in 2023. Who? The PDP. Because they were the ones that brought up the necessary reforms that must take place for us to have an unfettered INEC, an unfettered electoral process, so that in the end, everything about litigation on electoral matters are done away with. Then you bring in the substantive president, the substantive governor, the substantive this and that. That wasn't done. And finally, the call that it should be done now, for me, is an unnecessary heating up of the polity. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Because we have often lived with it. Do you understand that? We have often lived with it, and I don't see why we cannot live with it, because it is tenable this time around. The only problem has always been that the person elect that is sworn in a substantive capacity will use the state machinery to try to keep himself there. Even funding the litigation itself and the defense is done from the state coffers. There is no evidence that any governor whose election was challenged, any president whose election was challenged, that was sworn in, used his personal resources to pay his team of lawyers. I want to be corrected on this. None, not one. That means they use the state coffers. So these are problems, but it's not starting with Tinubu. Let us live with it and change it. Know that we need to implement Justice Mohamed Wise report on electoral reforms. That is the solution to the problem.
All right, still on election matters. Now let's take a look at this headline from The Nation. Adamawa Rec, others get bail, and Adamawa Rec is still insisting. And he said, in his words, "I did not do anything wrong in declaring Binani winner." Adamawa Rec insists, and he still insists that Binani won that election.
Well, you see, what is at stake is not whether Binani won or not. It is whether the man, who Duari, the INEC commissioner for Adamawa, suspended, whether he was the one statutorily and legally empowered to declare Binani, or anybody for that matter. He wasn't. The laws are clear on that. I read somewhere, that the man may have relied to come up with this is nefarious action. A place that says the action of INEC official, is valid until it is set aside by the. Do you understand? I now ask. That means Festus Okoye would have just gone to a conference center and announced anybody the winners. I don't know if you understand what that is. Is he not an INEC official?
Yes, he is.
That is not the contemplation of the law. The returning officer for presidential election is the national chairman of INEC. That's what the law says. Where there is problem and the man cannot discharge that function, it will be obvious. But we have never been confronted with that. And I'm not even sure that the law has any provision on what should be done in case of emergency. Because we are human, and an INEC chairman can slump and die. People have died under inexplicable emergency circumstances. I don't know what the law says about that. For returns at state level, the governors, right? Governors elect to return them. Is done by returning officer. As I pointed by INEC chairman particularly. The man that is the rec for Adamawa State, assuming that function of the person that was duly and legally appointed is illegal, is criminal, and he knows it. You saw the way and manner he even did it. He stood there and just announced the woman. Like no reference, no record.
Even when the media team wasn't
no records. The normal thing is that you show through figures how the person won. Local government by local government by local government by local government. Then the total, there are rules. The man did not follow any of them. Yes. He simply said the woman was the winner of the election. Based on what? Based on which law and based on which figures? People like that, should really be dealt with under the law,
because they actually
you understand that?
bail.
And let me tell you, of course they can get bail. You know, it's not murder, so the offense is bailable. Do you understand that it's bailable? So I have no problem with him getting bail. And my own problem is that electoral offenses have never been properly treated in Nigeria. He's not the only one that has done this kind of a thing. There is contention that Professor Yakubu acted outside the law. If it is established in the tribunal that they acted outside the law, is he not supposed to face similar trial? Do you understand what I'm saying? But it has happened before. I keep talking about Iwu. He acted outside the law, but did he face any trial? So I will not be surprised if Mahmoud also does not face any trial. The reason is simple. He wasn't working for himself, carrying out instructions the way he understood them, the way he believed it was going to serve the interests of his appointors and those who directed him on what he did. I say so because he enjoyed all the ambience and protection of the law to be independent. He had all the money he needed. He had the legal framework clearly provided for in Electoral Act 2022, and of course has given effect under the electoral guideline 2022 of INEC itself. So he had no problem in succumbing to any pressure from anywhere. But again, you see, all these things may not be enough, depending on where you are coming from and the understanding you had with the people who brought you in. This is what is playing out. So let us hope that that our own judiciary does not suffer the same fate, because if you look at the constitutional schedules, you see the executive arm on schedule 2 or schedule 1, you see the legislature on schedule 4, you see the judiciary on level 6 of the 1999 constitution. What does that tell you? That judiciary is our last bus stop. It's our last bus stop. But the judiciary has been seriously penetrated, infiltrated, compromised. And this is a rare opportunity for them to redeem their image. If they don't, I'm sorry. Do you understand that? Nigeria will survive it, I am sure. I keep saying it's all about Tinubu, because the charade has always been there since 1999. His own is just a repetition of what has always been the fiasco we call elections in Nigeria.
All right, now away from that story, let's look at what's going on in the United Kingdom in court. This headline from The Nation says Ekweremadu, wife and doctor to no fit today, but that the International Human Rights Commission has joined those pleading for the former Deputy Senate President Ekweremadu and his wife Beatrice. I will remember that the Nigerian Senate, the House of Reps and ECOWAS Parliament have been pleading on his behalf after the UK court found him guilty by let me find that story. He was found guilty of facilitating the travel of a young man to Britain to exploit his organ for his daughter Sonia following her diagnosis, which indicated that she required a kidney transplant. Don't you think this is a show of embarrassment for the Senate to constantly keep playing on his behalf? Because he committed an offense and he should be left to face the consequences of the offense he has committed.
Well, you see, the problem Ekweremadu is facing is a problem of jurisdiction. Do you understand that? The law under which he is convicted couldn't have applied in Nigeria or anywhere for that matter. Do you get the point? It's a new law in the UK, and under that law there were things Ekweremadu did that are lawful in Nigeria, but they don't consider lawful there
in the UK.
You need to understand this. Look at what they said in what you read out. He facilitated. Now, yes, I read a letter written by Ekweremadu to the British Visa Office in Nigeria, explaining why Wamini, that's the name of the young man, was going to the UK. In fact, in that letter there was full disclosure that he was going to donate to the daughter. He named the daughter That, do you understand that?
Yes.
There was full disclosure. So starting from that letter itself, written to the British Visa Office in Nigeria, on which basis the Wamini guy was given a medical visa. If Ekweremadu wanted to be clandestine, there was no basis for him to write such a letter, disclosing everything. Do you get the point?
Yes.
Somehow, he wasn't directly involved in the doctor you mentioned was the one that ran all this. So there were loose ends, and the Wamini guy got there, and the organ didn't match, and because he didn't match, there was need for him to come back to Nigeria. The young man didn't want to return to this hellhole called Nigeria, and came up with all these stories. And of course, remember, he started by saying that he was even a minor. At the end of the day, he owned up. He said he needed to say he was a minor to give him the opportunity to be protected, even by the British police. It's a messy situation, right? Very messy. You ask yourself, supposing the organ matched, are we going to be hearing this story?
Yes.
Do you understand that? That's just it. I even read another story that I'm saying what they meant by not matching is because the legal conditions didn't match, that the young man said he didn't even understand the organ he was going to donate. I read that yesterday. These are afterthoughts. You see, Ekweremadu is just unfortunate. I know Ekweremadu personally, one-on-one. I was his SA communications when he was Deputy Senate President.
Okay.
So, I know him. And, when I say I know him, I know precisely what I am talking about.
Okay.
It's not somebody I would say I have an opinion about from a distance, things I read or stuff. No, I know him. I know him to his house. I know the family. I understand he's a very decent man. Very, very decent. And of course, there are people who naturally would want to donate.
Yes.
Do you understand that? Yes. The only difference is that they would want to ask for gratification. I want Nigerians to understand where this problem is coming from. The gratification is what makes organ donation in Nigeria different from what happens in the UK. In UK, there must be no trace of compromise. That is to obtain the consent of the donor by inducement. Do you understand that? That is where the problem, these are some of the things that cause the problem for Ekweremadu. And of course, again, because he wasn't the one really organizing this thing by himself. He was the lawyer that even, Ekweremadu doesn't know the young man one-on-one.
Okay.
Do you understand that? You see, because he never really planned it from day one. If he did, he would have been able to cover all these loopholes. He saw it as a natural process. Do you understand that? And the UK court is not seeing it like that. They believe the young man was being exploited. And that is just it. And like I told you, the problem is jurisdictional. Yes. If it's in Nigeria, it wouldn't be. And it's not because our laws are not fair and moral. They are fair and moral enough, even in that consideration. But their own case, they have a historic experience in the UK that made them to come up with that law to check abuses that the country has experienced over time. And they used him as a scapegoat. Do you understand? And they used him, they looked for, a vulnerable big man to demonstrate the efficacy of that law. That's all. This is a political trial and political judgment, as far as I am concerned. And now, to respond to what you said concerning the Senate is aware of some of these things I have said. And it's one of their own. Senate is not seeing Ekweremadu as a criminal because it's not. He is not. I agree with the Senate on that count. Because when yes, in a jurisdiction, what is criminalized, Ekweremadu is not a Briton. He doesn't live in Britain. Yes. I don't have to say what I'm saying. I may not be aware of all the legal provisions to get this done. All he tried to do was to get a medical facility in UK that can ensure fair outcome in the whole process. He didn't go through, because it's not our jurisdiction. A crime is defined as an action that is criminalized in the sense that it is called an offense and against which there is punishment. That is a simple definition of crime. So until you call a particular action crime and apportion criminal responsibility in terms of punishment to it, is not a crime. So what Ekweremadu knew is not the British jurisdictional law provided for donation for organ transplant. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
What he was conversant with was Nigerian situation, because he doesn't live there. The person that complicated the whole matter should be the lawyer, not the lawyer, the medical doctor. I also don't think he treated the young man well. I personally have feeling that the doctor did not treat the young man well. The money that was made available for all these things, you can be sure that the young man may not have gotten up to 10% of it. Yes. And he allowed the young man to run into the street. Do you understand the problem?
Yeah.
And he was running around until hunger drove him into a police station. That's what happened. The whole thing wasn't properly handled. It's not because of any criminal intent. I am aware of people who have received organs, kidneys, from fellow Nigerians here. I'm aware, I know them, I'm not saying I have read. So, the person in question is Ekweremadu's daughter. Not that Ekweremadu is an organ harvester and organ trafficker. It's mean, it's too demeaning to qualify Ekweremadu in that light. So the call for clemency from Ekweremadu, for me, I think is more than justified. And I also don't think that the Nigerian government did enough. Because up till now, Buhari hasn't chipped in a word. He is in UK at the moment. Buhari ought to chip in a word. Do you understand that? Yes. He ought to chip in a word. He was the one that should have done what President Olusegun Obasanjo did. Obasanjo was the first person that started this call for clemency. He is an outgone president. The weight of his letter and the weight of an incumbent president of Nigeria, who is a friend to the UK, would have gone a long way. Yes. Remember that the same Buhari had to save one is either Aisha or somebody like that, in Saudi Arabia. He did it because he believed that Aisha was not guilty. And he threw his weight into the matter as the president of Nigeria. Why did you not do the same for Ekweremadu?
All right. Well, with what you've said now, let's hope that today they are supposed to get some verdict today. Let's see how that goes, and let's see where it continues from there. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
The pleasure is always mine.
It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's where we draw the curtain today and this week on The Press, reaching you live from the Abuja studios of KAFTAN Television. Do remember to stick out to KAFTAN Television to see what we'll bring for you through the course of the day. My name is Sandra Ago.
And I am Amadi Bobby James. Have a beautiful weekend.